Right now it brings me great pleasure to welcome Carly, Mark and Megan. I'm sure anyone who had television in the late 80s, early 90s would know more than a little bit about Sub Pop and its influence, and I know one label that forever has immortalised Seattle on the musical map. Thank you very much for joining us. Let's have a round of applause for them. Are you all well?
Thank you. We're psyched to be here, and we want to thank you guys very much for having us here.
Now, I mean, just to give people an idea on Seattle. I mean, a lot of people in this room live in Seattle. A lot of these people in this room have never been to Seattle, might not know anything about Seattle. I mean, you weren't born in Seattle, Mark. You've lived in Seattle for quite a while, but all of you have lived here for a while. And tell us about Seattle. What do you like most about Seattle?
The thing right now that I love the most about Seattle is just that it offers everything that you would want from a city, but it's small, it's manageable. We were joking around with Nick earlier because so many of the people from Seattle who are working here with the Red Bull Academy, we all know, and it's just because there's so much overlap in the music community here, and that makes what we do far more meaningful and really fun. It's the other thing that I love about being here is just that you're right next to nature. If you can split in 30 minutes, you can be snowboarding or hiking or just doing so many incredible things that you wouldn't be able to do in so many other cities. So I appreciate that.
Megan, what's your role in the Sub Pop global empire?
Well, I work as a general manager there, but half the time I kind of just feel like a mascot.
like the Wookiee for the...
Don't we all?
Yeah. It's the company. Sub Pop is a funny place in that it started out like so many other small businesses as a very, very small organization. It became large fairly quickly at one point, and then we ended up downsizing. For the past maybe 5 or 6 years, we really have not grown. It's been a medium-sized small company that consists of about 25 people, and I sort of work to hire some of those people when we need someone new to come in and just deal with basic operations.
Mark, how about your involvement?
My involvement?
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I play in a band. We put records out on Sub Pop, and now I work at Sub Pop and play in a band and put records out on Sub Pop.
And the band that you're playing will be called?
It's Mudhoney.
Nice. Now, I mean, just to give people an idea of, I don't know, the foundations that Sub Pop was kind of laid on. I mean, what was the music scene like in Seattle in like the late 70s, early 80s? And what inspired and kind of had a major influence on, what Sub Pop was founded on?
I actually think Mark might answer this better than me because I'm sorry to pass it over to you, but when I moved to Seattle, it was in '89, and I'd never been to Seattle until the late '80s, so I know what my impression was like, but a little bit before then, I think you might be better at speaking to that because you were playing music then.
Right. Well, for the most part, there was a lot of cover bands playing in the bars around town, and just like a handful of people who weren't into that, and they would rent out halls that would get closed down because people would steal meat from the freezers, or fuck up the toilets. Every once in a while, someone would try to open up a club, and that might last a year or so, and then the teen dance ordinance struck, which shut down all ages shows in town. And the group of people that I was kind of hanging around with were luckily just about 21 at that time. And there were 1 or 2 places that would let our bands play on Tuesday and Wednesday nights, the hot nights of the week. And that's kind of what it was like in the mid-'80s.
I mean, you mentioned the teen dance laws?
The teen dance laws.
Teen dance laws. Can you tell us a little bit more about this, man?
There used to be a disco-y place called the Monastery, which young kids would come to, and the older people there would feed them MDA, and some of the kids' parents were a little freaked out by this. And I guess they had, ties to people in the city government, and they came down hard and passed these just insane laws that, like, if you wanted to have an all-ages show, you had to have like $1 million worth of insurance, just making it basically impossible to have an all-ages show. And that drove things farther underground, which in a way I think was really good.
Well, I mean, what music were you guys listening to a lot of, and what bands were, having a major influence during this time?
Well, I can't
say for
talk
example,
about everybody else, but for me,
you and your friends.
I came up through in the 70s, I was listening to kind of classic rocky sort of stuff, what was on the radio, and then somewhere along the line I discovered punk rock, and that changed my life. And so I was going to see local punk bands and like bands that would come around on tour, like Black Flag and whatnot. And after a while, a lot of the hardcore, the play as fast as you can thing got really boring. And and I rediscovered music that I hadn't actually listened to before, like Black Sabbath, or the Stooges I discovered before that, And it seemed like once you were, if you knew anything, if you were like a punk kid locally, one of the first bands that you learned about that wasn't from the current era but was earlier was the Sonics, And so after a while you just get tired of like hearing Minor Threat clones, as good as Minor Threat was, but
The thing, do you mind if I jump in for a second?
Yes, please do.
The thing that was really amazing to me coming from the East Coast and moving to Seattle was that it really truly felt like two different worlds at that time. On the East Coast, specifically in Massachusetts, which is where I lived, we were coming out of a very good economic time and into a very bad one. There was, it was not uncommon to have construction that was unfinished just in the roads, in the streets, on buildings. There were people who had lived in Massachusetts for generations who were leaving because there were no opportunities. When I moved to Seattle in 1989, it was totally different in the sense that it still felt very isolated, which I'm sure it must have even earlier than that. There were, for example, there were tours. There were larger bands would skip over Seattle. They'd play in San Francisco. They'd play in LA.
They'd play in Minneapolis.
They'd play in Minneapolis.
Maybe they'd get to Denver.
Yeah, and then they would hit like the major cities on the East Coast. So I felt very lucky in that as a kid, there were times when I could see those bands. When I came here, thank God I was 22, so I could, see more shows than what underage kids were able to access or enjoy. It was strange because you had this small city that was in the process of being built up. There was so much construction in Seattle at that time, but it was happening. The city was being built. Everyone was working. There were tons of opportunities. Seattle was a place that was growing. At the same time, there was a really funny, to me, sort of dark side, which was where a lot of the music stuff was happening. It seemed like Seattle was a different place during the day than it was at night. And it was a place where a lot of people were going out, and there was a sense that it was a very lively and thriving scene for musicians and people who love music.
I mean, you mentioned like the geographical and even musical isolation. Was this what had somewhat of an effect on a sound that was starting to emerge in Seattle that was kind of localized?
It's funny because I think a lot of people have a tendency to say that that bands in certain cities sound a certain way, and I think there's some truth to that in the sense that a lot of people who play music in bands have either played in other bands or they inspire their friends and teach their friends and all of that stuff. So there, I think sonically there probably is some type of overlap that exists, but at the same time, being someone who loved a lot of the bands from Seattle, I never thought that Mudhoney sounded like Tad, or that Tad sounded like Soundgarden, or, you know, and so when people decided that they were going to have this kind of lazy shortcut and call it all grunge, not just most of us thought that was laughable, because...
And yet you perpetuated it.
Because that was the fun part.
Well, I mean, one question, you probably hate answering this one, but where did the term grunge come about?
That came from Bruce Pavitt, and it came from there was a kid who called up to interview him, and Bruce had this super long cord on his phone. And
now, when you say Bruce Pavitt, who is this mystery man?
Thank you for asking. I'm sorry I didn't give background. Sub Pop was founded by two people, Bruce Pavitt and Jonathan Poneman. Jonathan was here earlier, but had to split because he's going to New York today. But Bruce actually founded Sub Pop, and Jonathan joined in. And they were both in the office working together for the early years in Sub Pop's history. And Bruce was just wonderful and creative and bright and crazy and just utterly out of his mind. And some people would just sit in fear, because it was not uncommon that he'd come up to you at your desk and he'd be like, "So what exactly do you do around here?" And there's like 6 or 7 employees, so it's like everyone knew what everybody else did, but Bruce sometimes forgot, and so one day Bruce was on the phone doing this interview, and the person said, you know, "What do you call the type of music that Sub Pop puts out?" And I remember Bruce kind of just rolling his eyes, because it was the same question again. And he said, "Grunge." And the person said, "Great." And there became this weirdo epidemic that followed.
I was going to say, at this point, should we actually watch a video? Or maybe Mark, there's a video of yours on this DVD, or do you want to play something? Just to give people an idea of kind of where we're at the very beginnings of Sub Pop.
I'd love to break it up and actually share some stuff. And the other thing that I would say is that if there are any questions or anything like that, we would love to answer them, or if you have comments.
And sit up straight, come on.
So what I would say is just feel free to jump in, so long as you don't mind.
Not at all.
Okay. So maybe let's start with one of the videos. That's an excellent choice. Can we have the Dwarves drugstore video?
So tell us a little bit about the band we just saw.
The Dwarves actually were not from Seattle, but they were one of the first, I think they were maybe the second band after the Afghan Whigs signed to Sub Pop. The Fluid, that's right. They were the second or third. And they, the thing that was so great about the Dwarves, in my opinion, was that they would write songs that were just seconds long, as you can see or hear, and they were live one of the most exciting bands that maybe I ever saw, in the sense that there was something very raw and kind of scary and maybe even dangerous, almost in a G.G. Allin type way. And you never quite knew what you were going to get. But the other thing that was amazing about them...
After seeing them a couple times, you knew what you were going to get.
Yeah, maybe there were fewer surprises, huh? But the thing that I loved and really appreciated about them was that even though they sort of came off as flippant, irreverent, and in kind of a great way, kind of retarded, they were also some of the smartest people that I think I've ever worked with. Blag is a complete brainiac and will just go off on whatever subject he's interested in at length and intelligently. And they were really just into sort of conceptualizing stuff, and they were really fun to work with. At one point, they believed that Sub Pop owed them quite a bit of money, which I don't know if that's even true or not, but they were like, we're going to come up there, we're going to trash the fucking joint. You know, you people, you better run. You better run. And we were all like, okay. So maybe one person left, Milo, the kid who worked downstairs. But I think everyone else stuck around. And when they came up, they were total pussycats. And they were like, what's going on? And they took a can of spray paint. And this is how they trashed the joint. I mean, just, come on, like, just throw something. But they didn't. They took a can of spray paint and they wrote on the tile section of the floor, which could have been cleaned up, you owe Dwarves money. I was like, that's just not trashing, especially when you do that. Like, you know, you come on. But you know what? It made for fun times and it made for funny times. I wouldn't mind playing some music if you guys don't mind. Do you care?
Go for it.
There are a couple of. Oh, I'm sorry.
Probably like 89.
Yeah.
You know, I got another Dwarves story for
Please,
you.
please.
One time we played a show in San Francisco, and afterwards Blag, the singer for the Dwarves, invited us to his apartment for a party. You know, we figured out this is going to be out of hand, the Dwarves. It's going to be crazy, you know, drugs, girls, everything, you know. We get over there, and Blag keeps telling us to be quiet because the neighbors are complaining. So that's how rad the Dwarves were.
Yeah.
I mean, one thing I was going to ask just before we go into another track, you know, talking about around the time that Sub Pop was founded, something that's been a bit of a common theme with the different people that have been guest lecturers at the Academy so far is the importance of radio, and history's kind of dictated that whenever there's kind of like I don't know, some kind of new musical revolution, it's been the radio that's played a major part. I mean, what was the role of radio in Seattle around this time?
I would say, and please interrupt me,
Like
Mark,
local
but I'd say
radio.
there was no part as
None,
far as radio went.
None. Even like KCMU, which is now KEXP, like, you know, they were pretty much an Anglophilic station at the time, and they played a lot of The Cure.
Yeah.
You know, they weren't, in the early days, they weren't really playing very much local music at all, except Jonathan had a local show called Audio Oasis where he'd play demos of local bands and whatnot, but for the most part,
Yeah, it really played no role at all.
yeah, not until like stuff got noticed, like outside of the country and in other cities, did anyone here really give a shit? And then they really gave a shit. That was annoying.
Yeah.
So you want to play something now?
I'd love to. There are a couple of songs off of Sub Pop 200, and I was kind of thinking that
yeah.
Tad, Sex God Missy might be good, and maybe the Thrown Ups. Or not.
No.
You want to pick another one?
Well, you could definitely start with that Tad song.
Yeah, let's start with that. Let's see these in here.
Was it Fisk Home?
The Steve Fisk one?
No, this one, yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, Sub Pop originally started off as a fanzine that Bruce Pavitt did, and a couple of issues of the fanzine were cassette compilations, and this is the second comp that originally came out on vinyl. The one before that was it wasn't really local bands; it was kind of more like a national thing of oh geez, who was all on that?
The
Sub Pop 100.
I can't even remember.
I think Big Black was on it. Skinny Puppy, which was weird. And the Human, I think, were the only local band.
I mean, you know, one thing I was going to ask before we play this track, though, what was the major kind of reason that Bruce and Jonathan decided to join forces? Obviously, Bruce, like you just mentioned, already had the fanzine. He was putting out cassettes. He'd already put out the Green River album, I believe.
Yeah.
At what point did they go, right, well, let's start a label?
Well,
The Green River album was Bruce and Jonathan were already working at that point.
Okay.
That's about the time they started working together. Jonathan was really into Soundgarden, and Bruce was really into Green River, and they decided to pool their resources, as far as I understand.
Yep. And they were, John was promoting shows in town, and he was spending a lot of his time doing that, and Bruce was writing, and they were, you know, two people in a very small group of...
And DJing. He was DJing.
Oh, and DJing, right. I forgot about that. They originally actually thought that maybe Sub Pop would just be a singles-only label, and they would just release 7 inches, but, you know, their ideas changed quickly, and then they ended up releasing full albums.
I mean, and originally was it mainly they wanted to focus on putting out Seattle artists, or it had no boundaries?
I think part of it actually was that they felt like they were around all of this great music, and there was nobody to put it out. And Bruce had already sort of started in some ways with the compilations and just, you know, they were doing the singles. And finally they learned that there really was a need, and in their opinion, it was necessary for people to hear this music. And people wanted to hear it, is what they learned. So they kind of just kept going with it. So we're going to hear a song by a band named Tad, and in my opinion, this was one of the most amazing bands that were in Seattle at that time. So.
Tell us a bit about Tad.
Tad were, well, they were a band who maybe, did they start in like 87?
No, probably not till about sometime in 88. They started up after we did.
Okay. The thing that I loved about Tad is just, I love that you had, I mean, you have to, I don't know, well, for any of you who don't know anything about this band, the lead singer, Tad, is, shall we say, corpulent and, and extremely so. And the first time I ever saw them play was in New York, and he had the sort of token Sub Pop loser shirt on. And here's this guy who's he's just enormous, and he truly looks like an obese lumberjack, like just facial hair. Like you know, it's like you hear all the shit about Bigfoot, and Tad was the closest thing that I'd ever seen to maybe really being a Bigfoot. And then he got up and
I'll
just...
pass that on to him.
Please do. And then he just got up on stage and just totally floored me because, you know, he just played this incredible, like, gritty but amazing music. And I was a huge fan.
And one thing you mentioned before, you were saying that when Bruce and Jonathan first started the label, you know, they were really just thinking of putting out 7 inches. You know, there was this thing, the Sub Pop Singles Club. Tell us a little bit about this.
The Sub Pop Singles Club was, you know, those guys loved doing 7 inches. And there were a lot of people around that time who believed that really every release should just be a 7-inch because the idea was that most albums really consisted of 2 great songs and so much filler in between. That's not why the Singles Club existed. It existed for a couple of reasons, and actually one of the reasons was quite practical, which is that the label needed money, and they needed money really badly. So they figured if they set up the subscription service with bands that they were really excited about, they would have a constant incoming stream of cash. The other thing on top of it is that when you work at a label, you can't work with every single band that you really, really love. And so one way to reach out to so many of these other bands is just to do a single with them. So it sort of worked with their philosophy as well as just a more practical...
How many people around that time were actually on the subscription?
There were, geez, I should know this.
And was it overseas as well, or was it just America?
It was overseas as well, and I believe, I remember it at one point being like, oh my God, I think maybe there were like 7,000 or 8,000 at one point. And then it sort of whittled down. By the very end, it was maybe around 1,500.
Some of those records are obviously worth a lot of money now.
Yeah, and the weird thing is that there were some singles that Sub Pop did, non-singles club singles, but regular ones. There was always some bit of limited edition something, so weird colored vinyl or black vinyl that was more rare than the colored stuff. You know, they try to switch it up and play around with it. But there were some 7-inches back in the day that they couldn't even give away. I mean, they sat and collected dust, and the two that I remember...
We're not going to name names, or we are?
I'm going to name them. One was the Smashing Pumpkins. We couldn't give them away if we tried. We'd use them as coasters. We'd throw them as Frisbees. And the other one was a whole 7-inch. Couldn't give it away. It was unbelievable. Eventually, the bands became so huge, and they sold out, and there were some people who are very happy to get the last couple copies. Yeah. But I'll tell you, if I never see those covers again, I'll be psyched, because I had to look at them for way too long. Yeah. So
I think a lot of people would also be under, have a warped sense of reality, in the sense that a lot of people believe that Sub Pop, right from the start, was very successful and it all went boom, but really, these first 4 years or so, they were really tough, weren't they?
They were extremely tough, and as much fun as they were, it was extremely stressful. The Sub Pop had this weirdo hype around it, and so that's why people thought that it was a very successful place. And there was money coming in through direct sales, through the Singles Club, but the reality is that you have two people, Bruce and John, who are real music lovers and not real businessmen. And so they learned as they went along how to run a business, and they weren't thinking that there might be some smart ways to try to make ends meet, such as create a budget, and work within that budget. And so they just sort of spent money as they needed to spend money, and there were many, many times when there were stressful days at work because we didn't have money and we needed to get the new Tad record out, or we needed to make sure that a band could get to Europe and their flights were paid for. So it was extremely stressful, and it actually is wonderful. I'm making it out to sound really horrible. There were days that were horrible, but there were most days that were really fun because you're around these incredibly creative people and incredible musicians who are coming in all the time just because they are downtown and they want to hang out, or they actually need something. And so, there were good times, but it seemed to get steadily worse before it got any better. And at the very end was difficult in the sense that many people had to get laid off. It went almost overnight from a 25-person operation down to a 4 or 5-person operation. And you have to also remember that, Seattle is, and especially was at that point, a very small city. And so you're talking about friendships, and they were difficult times for both Bruce and Jonathan, and I would argue affected them in a way that I believe neither fully recovered from.
You lived during this time yourself?
I did, and I was laid off at that time. Yeah. So.
I mean, another thing that's been a bit of a common theme throughout music history, especially in the last 20, 30 years, is this whole thing of it actually takes another country, another magazine, be it a media agent, usually a magazine, to actually start talking about something that's happening in another country before the own country realizes it, and then all this hype builds from there. Now, this is exactly what happened with Sub Pop. There was a journalist from the Melody Maker. Tell us a little about this, and this was just the start of what was to become this huge media explosion.
Yeah, there was a kid named Everett True who worked, he was not really a kid. He was always kind of had an old vibe about him. Yeah. And so I call everyone a kid. So there's this freakazoid from Melody Maker named Everett True, and Everett was really intrigued with the stuff that Sub Pop was doing. And
he was also a huge fan of K.
Oh, that's right. I forgot that.
He was a huge fan of
Yeah, loved the stuff that Calvin Johnson was doing in Olympia. And
when you say Calvin Johnson?
Yeah, he's He was a kid at that time. He started a record company called K Records out of Olympia, Washington. He was in a band called Beat Happening and released many of his own records. And we're leaving these CDs with you guys. If you're at all curious, there's a Beat Happening song on the Sub Pop 200 compilation. But Everett came over and interviewed people at that time and ended up doing this article on Seattle and Sub Pop, and that led to one thing, led to another, and
John
said,
Peel was already playing some of the singles too.
was he? I don't remember that part.
Before Everett came out.
He probably got hooked on through, or Everett probably tapped into that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it basically, it was people overseas paying attention to what was happening here before many people here ended up realizing that there were some pretty cool things happening at that time.
I mean, obviously, you know, what followed was kind of like a musical media circus that's probably, you know, hasn't been seen since. For you guys living in Seattle and being, you know, firmly entrenched, this was just like your local thing. At what point did you guys start thinking, you know what, this is getting a bit pear-shaped?
Really early, actually.
Yeah, probably 89 or 90.
Yeah, I would say around 90 it became intolerable.
And then it got worse.
Yeah, that's exactly what was happening. It was really funny because you would talk to people and say, like, does this seem crazy? And people go, yeah, it's really gross. And then you'd say, well, this has got to be, it's probably peaking right now. And then you wouldn't think, or you couldn't imagine how it could get worse, yet it did. And by getting worse, what was happening was there were A&R people coming from major labels who were coming in and signing every single band in Seattle.
Bands that hadn't even really, they'd only just started kind of playing together, but because they were from Seattle, it's like, hey!
Yeah, and sometimes, you know, sometimes great bands, and sometimes bands where you're just like, what the fuck is that person even thinking? Like, this is crazy. And you know, and all due respect to any of the musicians.
Candlebox.
But, yeah, exactly. So there was a whole lot of that going on, and then just when you thought that peaked, then something even weirder ended up happening. One day, I'll just give it a story as an example. One day I was walking to this Club Rebar, and this car stopped and pulled up beside me, and they had rolled down their window, and they had like weirdo, like Marysville hairdos. You guys don't know what that means, but basically it's like, you know, it's like suburb hairdo. Like we on the East Coast, you make jokes about the, you know, the whatever suburb is in the city with the claw bangs and all that shit. Well, that's basically, it was that equivalent. Stopped up and said, hey, do you know if Mudhoney or Pearl Jam are playing anywhere tonight? And I was like, are you kidding me? No, I don't think so. And they said, do you know where? And then they had a list of venues in Seattle that they thought they might be able to go and find some musicians and just have a beer with them or something. And it was clear that there had been a list that had been, someone had developed that said, if you want the grunge experience, you know, do your bangs like this and go to these places. And drink a microbrew, you're going to be psyched. And so I sat there and I was just like, this is fucking gross. It really was gross. It was gross for a number of reasons. The obvious, like you have to deal with that. The other thing was it took what was at the time a very rich community and forced it to disperse. Because the musicians were then, a lot of the musicians, and you know better than me, but a lot of the musicians were either like approached or there was shit that was just projected onto them. People thought a certain thing about them and couldn't get that. It made a lot of people just want to stay at home.
I mean, how were the majority, and you know, Mark, especially this question's for you, I mean, what was the majority of the experiences from the community towards like all these A&R people sniffing around?
I think it was mostly amusement, and for some people it was hey, this is my chance. I don't know. We signed to a major label. We met with a couple amusing A&R people, and we met with like one really cool one, so, you know.
Another thing, Megan, you know, I hate to bring it up, it probably comes up a lot, but your name will be forever immortalized in Google searches as the mastermind behind the whole grunge hoax, the grunge speak thing. Can you, I know you've probably told this story a million times, but for people that haven't heard it, this kind of represents the epitome of just how, the extreme of how bad it got.
I actually haven't told this story in a while, so I don't mind telling it, but there was a time when, this was in 91 or 2, it was in 92, and Jonathan called me and said, you won't believe this, there's a reporter from the New York Times.
Judith Miller.
No, it was, what was the kid's name? Okay, Judith Miller, Judith Miller, yeah, you may have heard of her, and I can't remember the real kid's name right now, but anyway, this person was curious in getting a lexicon of grunge. He thought that in every subculture, he believed there's a way that people speak and sort of like code words for things. And he wanted to know he wanted to tap into the grunge world and learn how to communicate properly with Seattle musicians. So, so Jonathan said, you know, I couldn't really answer his question at all, and I thought you might have fun with it, so I gave him your phone number. So I said, okay, and literally like a minute later, the phone rings, and this kid asks me if I can share the lexicon of grunge with him, and I didn't even know how to answer him. I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And he said, no, you know, we're doing a grunge piece, and we're including a lot of fashion. So I said, you know what, give me the word, and I'll give you the grunge equivalent. So he's shooting out like girlfriend, and I think I said tuna melt, and like just giving him these horrible and obvious lies. Excuse me. So, and I kept thinking at some point he's going to just go, okay, joke's over. But he never did. And he didn't print all of them. He left out the ones that were a little too spicy. But he printed...
But just some other examples of just how blatantly obvious it was. There was one swinging on the flippity flop, bound and haggard.
Yeah, I forgot about that.
Lame stain.
Yeah, that was just like when someone's just being a loser, you call them a lame stain. Swinging, he's like, what do you call, like when you call up your buddy and say like, let's go out and just have fun tonight? I was like, we call it swinging on the flippity flop. And all you could hear was this. He's typing everything verbatim. And I just sat there, I was like, this is unbelievable. And they printed it. And I was psyched when they printed it. I was like, there's no way, like nothing this good is ever going to happen to me again. I'm done. Done and done. I couldn't believe no one questioned it. The weird thing was a couple of months later, maybe 2 or 3 months later, this publication at the time, The Baffler, which was done by a kid named Tom Frank, who now does The Nation, and he does a lot of NPR stuff. But he called up and said, I know this is bullshit. I kind of want to like pretend I'm breaking this big story, and I said, do whatever you want. And so shortly after, the New York Times called me up screaming. The editor called me screaming because I lied about the grunge lexicon, and I said, do you not have fact checkers? Because if you look at that, it's obviously not true. And then they then told me that they knew it was a joke, and I was like, then why are you yelling at me? and they couldn't answer that one, so
I mean, musically,
we agreed to disagree.
Yeah. I mean, musically, what are some of the other things that are happening around this time, and should we play something else for everyone?
Yeah, it'd be good to play something else. You know, I mean, really...
Maybe another video.
That would be awesome.
Yeah. You guys want a video?
Yeah. I mean, really, this time, it was just a time where you took a city and really just, there was a spotlight on the city, and there were, you know, I keep saying it was a drag and a bummer and everything else, because it felt like that to me at the time as someone who just loved music. I could see a lot of stuff that I loved going away, and so that was upsetting to me. But there were many good things that came from it in the long run. You know, there were some bands who are great bands who went on to do great things, and maybe that wouldn't have happened otherwise. There was also, you know, it also forced Seattle to, in time, really reinvent itself and not just have second-rate, you know, Mudhoneys come up. Instead, there were, you know, you had Mudhoney and you had all of these other wonderful bands, but then you had other bands come from that. You had Built to Spill come from that, and Modest Mouse, and so many other bands that didn't really try to follow in the footsteps so much. There was a pressure to really have them do their own thing and find a way to do it really well. And so I think in that respect, you know, a lot of the stuff that I just referred to as a bogosity, in some ways it was a gift in that sense. It felt gross at the time, but things didn't really get old in a way that they could have. So, yeah. Video? Yeah. How about, let's, say it again? You want the Nirvana one? Okay. That one is number 6.
Hot Chocolate Boy.
Is that in here? Yeah, you're right. Number 10. Yeah, that'd be good. Can we watch those? Do you mind playing those back to back? You guys don't mind it. Sometimes Carly just starts dancing too. Interpretive style.
I mean, before we go to the next video, one thing that's definitely got to be asked is, tell us a little bit about Nirvana, and in particular, I mean, all media hype, you know, with any kind of media hype, it always needs an icon, it always needs a focus, and I read an interview once with Jonathan Poneman who referred to Nirvana and Kurt in particular as the perfect storm. Tell us a little bit about this.
You know, you might want to jump into on this one.
Or not.
Yeah. You know, the thing, this is when things become difficult because, you know, Kurt, let me start out even by sharing a conversation. It's funny, so much time passes and I still don't even really know where to begin with answering questions like this sometimes, and so you have to forgive me for that because I'm just going to sound like a dunderhead. But what happens when something becomes so incredibly hyped, and it wasn't just hype, there was true substance. That music touched people in a way that was transcendent at the time. But what happens when one person becomes the embodiment of a generation or a movement or a belief system is that everything that any one person wants or desires or wishes is projected onto that person. And for years and years and years, that's almost what Nirvana was to me, is the same thing that it was to anybody else, because that's what you're inundated with every day. You know, that's what you know, everyone sees that on magazines and on television, whatever. Working with Nirvana when I was at Sub Pop, it was like working with any other band, in the sense that, you know, these were great guys and funny guys and irresponsible guys, and sometimes quiet and sometimes not quiet. But they were like anybody else in that sense. And not to be so irreverent about Kurt or Nirvana, but they were no more special than any of the other people or bands. It's just that timing had a way of figuring out how to catapult them into this place that was almost unfathomable for anybody. So, you know,
But it wasn't just him, you know. It was also like Eddie Vedder at the time.
Yeah,
I mean, it
that's
was
true.
pretty much the two of them. And if it had been the other way around, if like Eddie Vedder had killed himself instead of Kurt, then his face would be on T-shirts all over the world, you know.
Yeah, that's true. It's weird stuff.
It didn't happen for that guy in Material Issue, though.
But working with them was really fun, and they were a great band, and undeniably, you know, incredible. Kurt was an incredible songwriter, and I think, you know, when Jonathan talks about the Perfect Storm reference, and I've heard him say that same thing, he really is talking about, you know, it was everything in every element that was necessary for something to become so big was in place for that to happen. The timing was right. The music that was being played, you know, on commercial radio was in desperate need of, you know, some actual like fresh blood and something new and exciting, and they're just everything
Always
led
seems
to
to
it.
be like that, though.
It is always the case, and that's why. I mean, that's why, you know, I think a lot of people don't
I mean, a
like.
year later, commercial radio was like, what, Bush?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and I mean, even now you're at a, you know, now we can put commercial radio on and we can hear some, you know, not tons, but you hear sometimes the Yeah Yeah Yeahs or Death Cab for Cutie or Modest Mouse to a large degree. It's just because the timing is right, and you know, there's a need for something new, and that's what was happening at that time for bands like Nirvana and Pearl Jam, and you know, every other band that became successful.
You wanted to play another video? Which one was that?
The Beat Happening one.
Hi, I'm 27 now, so this is my generation. You know, I mean, I still remember this, the moment that Nirvana and Soundgarden, Eddie Vedder, and was hitting the streets, was hitting our hearts, and in one way, we saw it happening. Like in the beginning, it was just new music for us, and it was just very fresh, and then there was a hype, and then there was this icon. So I saw it growing in a way, you know. Can you tell something about it? Because you were more close. Did he have or did you have the same idea? Like, oh no, now it's going to, you know.
You know,
What happened?
It's interesting for me listening to you, because I think for any of us who were in Seattle, we were so close to everything that was happening. It was really hard to see things in a linear way, or in a way where you can truly see growth. It partly felt surreal, and then it partly felt like you were trying to constantly measure what was happening so that you could just understand it and then attempt to function within it. And so for that, like, you know, when you say you were aware of like those stages and aware of its growth, that's actually amazing to me to hear, because I was unable to do that. I think for me, I was, you know, or for many people like me, you know, there were just tons of us at the time who just had jobs, who were just trying to do things day to day and try to understand what was happening around us. It was difficult, and it's difficult because you're always just trying to guess what's going to happen next, and you don't quite know. But I think, you know, I don't know. It's I always kind of feel like a dunderhead when I talk about it, and even though I'm supposed to maybe be one of many people who can shed some insight, it's difficult to, because you're really just trying to, you know, do what you love to do and find a way to just participate in your job and the city in which you live every day, and that was, you know, and not get swallowed up in it, not think that it's something that's going to last. And that's the other thing. I think most people knew that this was something, it came quickly, it was going to go quickly, And so you just kind of waited for the burnout to happen. So that's kind of what it was like for me, rather than seeing like true growth, if that makes any sense.
Just have a comment about the process of growth, and you say that it was pretty gross for you at a certain point to see like everything exploding, but I grew up in Israel, and only after sort of Nirvana exploded, we started getting into the sound and started exploring like deeper into sub pop and the singles and Mudhoney and L7 and like the Melvins, the Tads, all of that, and we got really into that sound, which influenced us only because we got exposed to the Nirvana explosion. So with us the process was reversed, but still. Yeah. That was the only way to get exposed to this music, which I'm really grateful that I eventually like.
You know, the thing is, I think I keep sounding like I'm super negative, and I have to apologize for that because
I can understand like what you're saying.
I think maybe a better way for me to describe it is, you know, when you find a band that not so many people know about, and it's a small band, and you love that band so much, you can't stop listening to them, you hang on every lyric. To some degree, I felt like that with the music that I was around. I really felt like I was around a number of exciting and brilliant musicians and just creative minds, like Bruce and Jonathan, and my friend Erica, who worked there, and so many other people, Charles Peterson, who was a photographer, just so many incredible people. And I felt like I had totally lucked out and just fallen into this situation, and it blew me away. And when, you know, and of course it was bigger than just what was happening at Sub Pop. It was, you know, it extended far beyond that. But when suddenly the band that you love starts to become more popular, and then there are people that you feel like maybe you could never have related to them, and they are wearing that band's shirt all of a sudden and singing the songs, and you know, you get older and you realize like that's a good thing. Like the more people that listen to wonderful music, maybe that's a reflection of a better world. But that's probably the optimistic way of looking at it, and to some degree I very much believe that. But for me at the time, I felt like this community that was so rich and thriving, I could see elements coming in that I didn't think were positive elements, sort of pulling it apart and diluting it in a way that was happening so quickly that at the time I felt somewhat resentful. And I think, and that's me as just, you know, a goofy kid with a job. I think if you were making music, or you were even closer to it in an artistic sense, there must have been more just sort of like a push and pull sensation going on as far as that stuff goes.
I mean, one thing I was going to say, which is actually kind of brings us to this point, is what was Sub Pop doing as a label, and what were the, you know, did they actually try and distance themselves from all that? Because by this stage, a lot of these bands had already signed with major labels. Yeah. Where was Sub Pop at? And did they kind of get this whole vibe where they wanted to go in the complete opposite direction even?
Well, they actually decided to head 3 hours south to Portland and sign a ton of those bands. So they actually remained in Seattle, but they were like, oh my God, you know what? There's this thing called I-5 South, and if you stay on it for 3 hours, there are all of these bands that the other A&R people aren't at. So within what seemed like about 40 seconds, they signed Pond, Sprinkler, Hazel, another band from there that I'm spacing, the Spinanes. Like within 2 seconds, it's almost like they took complete ownership of Portland, Oregon. And then from there, because Seattle's this big, Portland's this big. So, so once they ate up all of the Portland bands, they were like, you know, the East Coast doesn't look so bad. And so they signed Six Finger Satellite and Green Magnet School and a number of other East Coast bands. But slowly, I mean, I say this, I make it out to sound like cartoony, but But really what they were realizing was that, yeah, they needed to branch out, and that's exactly what was happening.
I mean, a lot of people, you know, might not realize as well as, you know, originally bands like Nirvana and Soundgarden were signed to Sub Pop, and then all of a sudden, you know, Mr. Geffen comes along and does his thing. But Sub Pop still do a right out of that. That's the thing that people might not understand. That is that what definitely happened?
I think I just missed it.
The original signings, like, you know, originally these bands are signed to Sub Pop, and then when the major label comes along,
Right.
there is still something in it for the label.
Yeah, absolutely. For a long time, I think Sub Pop thought of itself, and many people thought of Sub Pop as a launching pad. So you come to this small label that will do artist development, and you can release, you know, 1, 2, or 3 records, and then you should have your choice of whatever you chose to do, or whichever label you chose to work with. And to some degree, that was true. That was happening quite a bit, and Sub Pop could benefit from that in the sense that if Geffen or Warner Brothers or whoever it was going to be took this band and did right by them, and you know, took them and could even expand what they already had, Sub Pop benefits because Sub Pop has catalog, and you could see those sales increasing. So it was money coming in, and you know, who doesn't want some extra operating money? So it worked out well for everybody.
And eventually, if a band sticks around long enough, they come back.
That's the other thing. You know, it actually makes us really, really proud that we're releasing Mudhoney records, and not just because it's nice to sort of have a band, you know, I hate to sound so goofy, but sort of come home, which is what it felt like for you know, hopefully for you guys too. But it makes for a great story, and it means something, and it means something really important, because the other thing is that as much as a lot of people think of Sub Pop and they think of Nirvana, or now, you know, younger kids don't think of Nirvana, they think of the Shins and the Postal Service and bands like that.
Iron and Wine.
And Iron and Wine. But at that time, it was really, when I came to Sub Pop, it was Mudhoney that actually, when we would give tours, we would describe Sub Pop as the house that Mudhoney built. And actually, before Nevermind came out and Sub Pop was in such a severe financial crisis, it was the release of Every Good Boy Deserves Fudge. It was a release of that album that Sub Pop believed would pull it out of the slump and get it back on its feet. So, so to have a band like that actually come back and release records means a lot.
Yeah.
Yep.
And have you moved there like MP3 formats, or is it still more kind of tangible?
We're actually talking about releasing records on vinyl, and if you buy a vinyl LP, that there's some sort of code that will come with the record where you can download stuff for free.
Wow.
So you can have the vinyl and have it on your iPod or whatever it is you have.
Did you still want to go to the video?
Yeah, do you guys want to see the Beat Happening video? Okay.
I just had a question about, like, in the early days, Jack, you know, recorded a lot of the records, you know, like Bleach notoriously for $600 or something like that. Did he do a lot of the recording? I mean, and he produced some of the Mudhoney stuff as well? Jack?
Jack.
Yeah.
What's he doing now? And,
He just released a record.
on site?
Oops.
No.
Can you actually
No.
tell us a bit about him? Because for a lot of people, like he you know, was the producer for
Yeah.
that whole era. Tell us a bit about Jack.
He was like the house producer. What do you want to know?
He worked with everybody. And the other thing that just maybe a lot of people from here know, but maybe a lot of people don't, is that he's always been a musician himself. And so back in the late 80s, he was in a band called Skin Yard, and they were out on tour a lot of the time. But he's always been a musician as well as a recording artist. In fact, I mean a producer. If Phil Eck is still here.
Phil Eck.
Hey, Phil.
Who's that?
Phil. There's Phil. Phil is a producer who has lived in Seattle all of his life and or in the area, and actually was Jack Endino's intern, his only intern and assistant, and I just wanted to point that out.
We should bring Phil up to
But
tell some Jack and Dino stories.
You probably have some good. Do you have a good Jack story? Jack worked in this small recording space called Reciprocal, and it still exists today. It's still a recording studio. It's owned by Chris Walla and Josh Rosenfeld. Chris is in Death Cab for Cutie, and Josh has Barstool Records. But it's a tiny, tiny space, and that's where so many of those records from that time were recorded. It's funny when you go in there because it really is.
I think Chris was just trying to go for that, real grungy sound.
Yeah.
What's the reaction of sub pop did Mikey White, which is like what you think of the future?
What I thought of it? I thought it was an overproduced, steaming pile of poop. I mean, I much prefer the sound of Bleach to the sound of Nevermind. But, I prefer the Stooges over Gwen Stefani.
Right. In Bloom that we saw, who produced that?
That was Jack and Dino.
That was Jack and Dino. Nevermind.
And that was Chad Channing.
Yeah.
Not the original drummer, but like the drummer who played with them for 2 years or something?
Yeah, and Nevermind was ready to go as a Sub Pop record for a long time. It just, we were, I can't even remember all of the details at the time, but we had to wait to put it out, and by the time we were going to, they were already well into conversations with Geffen, and when they were signed to Geffen, they ended up actually first drumming with Dan from
We played
Mudhoney.
on one single.
One single.
One song on one single.
And then Dave Grohl came in after that. And then, but they re-recorded the entire record for that Geffen release.
Because of the major label, you got to do it again type thing?
I think it was partly that, and then partly maybe, I think so many musicians, if you have another chance, there are things you want to do different.
Sure.
And I know they wanted to get, they wanted Dave on that record, so.
Does anyone have the original?
Any what?
The original version.
Chad Channing's Nevermind.
Yeah, there are probably, you could probably find it somewhere if you really looked. I don't know where it is, but I have a cassette of it somewhere, I think, in a box at home somewhere that I'll probably never even see again. There were a lot of cassette copies that were passed around because just because it was a finished record at the time and people were getting ready to, hopefully have it released. There are copies somewhere.
I mean, going back to what we were talking about before, I think, as soon as the term grunge disappeared from the media subconscious a few years later, I think a lot of people may have thought that Sub Pop kind of disappeared into grunge obscurity, but the reality was Sub Pop was still going. It wasn't the best of years.
Right.
I mean, there was the second wave coming later, but what was going on during this time, just these kind of middle years?
Well, during that time, there are a couple of things. One is internationally, it totally disappeared because when Sub Pop did a deal with Time Warner was supposed to be releasing those records internationally. They passed on many of them, And the only option available at the time was finding another label to license stuff. It was too much work, too messy, and so there were many, many releases that happened or came about during the mid-90s that never saw the light of day overseas. In some cases, that's probably a good thing, and but in some
No
cases,
names?
well, you know.
Oh, there's a list.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like where to begin. Yeah. But there are some great records that came out during that time, and you know, like I thought some of those Sebado records were great records. But you know, for every Sebado record, there were a million that you're just like, oh my God, what are people thinking? I think during that time, it was, you know,
Were you working at the label at that time?
No, thank God I wasn't. Thank God.
Just wanted to clear that up.
I mean,
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
something that did, you know, something that interesting that did happen during this time is the man with the biggest beard I've ever had the pleasure of seeing, well, not in person, but on the telly, Mr. Bruce Pavitt. Why? At what point did he leave, and why did he leave? I mean, this was his, you know, this was his thing.
Yeah, it was his thing. Bruce, there were a number of different things. First off, one time I was with Bruce, we were in Portland, and we were kind of just goofing around, and he said, you know, this is after, post Nevermind. He said, like very post Nevermind, maybe like the record had been out for 5 or 6 months. And he said, you know, where do you go from here? Like, what next? He seemed like, you could tell there was this pressure that he was feeling from someone or something or whatever to do it again, or to, you know, find a band that would be the perfect band at the perfect time. And I think he wasn't excited to have that pressure. On top of that, Sub Pop at the time, there were a lot of changes at Sub Pop. Sub Pop was growing and sort of transforming into a small version of a major label, and I think that really grossed him out and horrified him, because when he started out doing Sub Pop, I don't think he ever wanted that corporate feel or that, you know, kind of static, gross comfort that comes with a larger corporation and a company, and he felt an ongoing disconnect.
I mean, how was it for Jonathan kind of taking the reins by himself at this period?
It was really difficult, because at the same time, Jonathan's dad was dying of Alzheimer's, and so Jonathan was at a point where he was slowly starting to check out just so that he could emotionally cope with his family stuff as well. You know, he's left with this obese, you know, organization that needs to streamline quite a bit and go on a big employee diet. And I think he was feeling ill-equipped to deal with that, because emotionally he just wasn't there, yeah, he was by himself.
But then a former fired employee came back, I do believe.
Oh yeah, I'd like to take full credit for all of the success. You know,
At what stage did you come back in, and what was your role when you came back into the company?
I came back in 1998, and I came in as the head of the marketing departments. So, and I believe that Jonathan brought me back not because I was super qualified and there weren't a million people who could have done a better job, because, to be honest with you, there are. But I think he trusted me, and we were good friends, and I understood the spirit of the company, and I think he wanted to bring some of that back in, but not make it an old Sub Pop. He wanted to sort of recreate it and bringing in some, you know, I think I was lucky because I could be considered some new life, and I was old life as well. So I was very fortunate and lucky in that.
And if I may ask, what is Bruce doing now, and how long is the beard?
He trimmed the beard, and
It's gone.
Yeah, like there was just stubble the last time I was around. It's kind of weird. So if anyone was hoping to have a little snack from 1989, not living in his beard anymore. We used to call him a piñata, because you could like smack his beard and crumbs from like 2 weeks ago would fly out. But anyway, Probably don't want to know that. Right now, he switches between living on Orcas, living in Seattle. He's a dad. He has 2 kids. He's still, he'll always love music, but he listens to lots of different types of music and just sort of follows his passion, whatever that is.
Somebody turned it off.
It is on. Yes, it is. Before we're going like in the activities Sub Pop is doing nowadays, I would like to go back a little bit, because the moment the hype was so big, it was like the moment everybody was talking about the marriage of Kurt Cobain instead of the music. For us in Belgium, there was a moment, and for example, for me, there was a moment I was getting interested in dance music. Because we just wanted something else, It was just a stupid reaction. Was there, like, here in Seattle, a similar empty, like, that people were playing,
Yeah, actually, I'm glad that you brought that up. It was because I was thinking about that yesterday, and I totally would have spaced not mentioning that. But in the mid-'90s in Seattle, there was such a huge and growing group of people who were totally into dance music, and that's what was happening here at that time. There were like new record stores popping up every other day, it seemed like, on Capitol Hill. And it was also, people will argue that it was Seattle that broke bands like The Prodigy. There was such support at that time. I mean, Sub Pop wasn't really doing it. Sub Pop released some records by Pigeonhead, and but never really like delved into that genre. But there were communities in the city that totally embraced that, and
as a backlash to what was happening with the hype of the music they formerly loved so much.
Probably just like that need for something new, yeah, and that was. It wasn't grunge. It wasn't something old. It was new. It was exciting. It was young, and it was thriving here.
Is that where like the sound of the postal service, for instance, came from? Because that's more like
actually
dance related.
The postal service consists of Ben Gibbard from Death Cab for Cutie and Jimmy Tamborello, who does more electronic type music in LA, and I think that's really something that just happened through that, like their collaboration. I know for a fact that they did not set out and say like, let's do like this fucking kick-ass like dance record. They both of their sensibilities just sort of melded in a way that created this record. I think they're both so smart in different ways, but I think that to some degree it was unintentional and something like truly, like just truly natural that happened and made that record what it was.
Tell us a bit about Sub Pop when you rejoined and kind of the years following that in terms of, I don't know, what kind of artists maybe you guys were going for. Was there a particular kind of sound or anything, or what was happening during this time?
During like when we started
1998, you said you came back, so
at that time it was weird in the sense that it was, let's work with younger bands who require smaller budgets. Let's work with younger bands that don't have a whole lot of baggage that Sub Pop created, to be honest. Let's and let's not do contracts let's not work with bands who want 5 record deals. Let's work with bands who want 1, 2, or 3 record deals, so that there's a constant rotation and shift, and there's new life always in the label's roster. So it was more like a philosophical thing that was happening.
Have you got something with you from this kind of era? Like you're talking like 98, 99, musically?
You know what's really funny is I wondered if I should bring that stuff, and I was like, oh, that's just an ugly time. So,
Why do you say it's an ugly time?
well, it's not really ugly. I'm being lame. I'm being
Lame-stain?
lame-stain. Yeah. It's that that time was truly about a shift in the label's philosophies and practices, and so what that means in a real sense, like when you implement those philosophies and try to really change, is it means the phasing out of some bands and bringing in new bands. And there's something, I almost grabbed stuff and then I was like, it feels like as far as some specific bands go, it almost feels like a death. And so I kind of just tried to stay away from it because there were some great things some great aspects to some of those bands and some great music that a lot of those bands made. And so I think in a twisted attempt to try to be respectful, I walked past some of that catalog.
I mean, do you think was there a pivotal moment or maybe even a pivotal record that came out on Sub Pop maybe a few years later after this ugly period where you really felt like, wow, we're onto something here again, and you felt the vibrancy that you felt maybe in '89 when you started?
Yeah, absolutely. There was, it's short-lived, but there was a band, Looper, and it was Stuart David from Bell and Sebastian, and he did a record, with his band called Up in a Tree, and it was new, and it was not like anything else that Sub Pop was doing at the time. They could work with a reasonable budget. It was good music. It felt exciting at the time, and was a really, in my opinion, kind of great record. That was one example. Shortly after that, we started working with a band called Beechwood Sparks, and shortly after that, we started working with a band called The Shins. And none of these bands were bands that that many people had heard of. And so, so it was a gradual change to try to find like younger, newer, smaller bands.
So right before that, you're talking about like Zen Gorilla and stuff?
Actually, I have to say I loved Zen Gorilla, and I forgot about them. That was a band that came in during that same time. Zen Gorilla, they had released records, but they were from San Francisco. They played maybe one of the best live sets compared to any of the other bands at that time. I mean, mind-blowingly incredible live band. And
I'm thinking about the African Wigs would be a good example of that process of changing, because they got like the punk rock background, but in some way they bring back the sonic sound. They mix it with the soul and gospel thing, and maybe for a lot of us it's a good example of that kind of evolution, like they got the powerful rock, they got the soul I mean they did a Barry White cover, man.
yeah, the bands that I was thinking of when I was thinking about like the bands who really kind of had to be phased out were bands like Combustible Edison, even the Spinanes at the time. As much as I really loved some of the stuff they were doing, the label started working with the Jesus and Mary chain, which was exciting, but maybe not the smartest signing for Sub Pop at the time. As big of a fan as I am, it seemed...
This was many years after...
Many years after.
Many.
Yeah. So, it was sort of more some of those other bands, Friends of Dean Martinez, stuff like that just sort of seemed like it needed
Cocktail Revolution.
Yeah, like a lot of that stuff needed to come to a screeching halt.
Should we watch the video? The Afghan Woods?
Yeah, let's watch the Afghan Woods video. Seems like we should watch a Mudhoney one too before we end things. Don't you think?
I mean, the bands we were talking about just before we went and saw the video, it kind of pretty much brings us up to Sub Pop present day. So, I mean, just tell us a little bit, you know, where is Sub Pop at? Where do you guys see yourself in the greater musical universe kind of thing? And tell us a bit about you know, the Sub Pop of 2005.
You know, it's hard to really know, like, what's to come, because even though I think so much just depends on a company's mindset, and from there you just find things that work or fit within whatever those ideas are. We love releasing music. The biggest thing that's changing for us is the distribution of that music. You know, we do far more digital sales than we did before.
I mean, Jonathan Poneman seems to be you know, he's the whole thing with the internet. Mm-hmm. You guys are into it, and he talks a lot about a digital meritocracy. Tell us a little bit about this. And I mean, how have internet sales, you know, affected it for better or for worse?
Well, you know, forever people believed that MP3s and even just releasing MP3s were in a negative way affecting sales. It seemed like there was no way around people sharing music, and so if you can't, you know, if something is taking its natural course and you can't control it, you have to find ways to work with it. So we tried to embrace that and make it even just a part of our marketing plan to have music available. And what we found is, and I believe it has something to do with the fact that we did this, but it also has to do with the fact that we were working with great bands who are making great music, is our sales started to increase. And I think a lot of, you know, when bands are fighting for radio time and just outlets so that people can hear what the band's music might sound like, it's just easier to give them a listening station in whatever form works. And so we saw our sales increase, and both on a digital level as well as a physical level. But through all of this, Sub Pop's philosophy has been, you know, this is something that is becoming normal, and this is a way that people are buying music and sharing music and listening to music that is continuing to move. And so we have to find ways to work with that and not against that. And, you know, I think having a small company and having the flexibility to change quickly and react quickly is a true luxury. And so, you know, we try not to fight those things. We try to embrace them and work with them and redefine what a music company is, or at least redefine what Sub Pop is.
I mean, can you tell us a little bit about, you know, the roster now, and in particular, I mean, for the three of you, what artists are you particularly, or albums are you really into, and you know, and what are the artists that you're happy to be working with them?
I love working with a bunch of our artists, but sometimes for very different reasons. Sometimes the people are just so extraordinary that it's just fun to be with them. But there's music that I love. I think more than even just talking about, or at least for me, for the bands that I love that Sub Pop is working with, I think I love even more the fact that we can work with a band like Wolf Eyes or Comets on Fire, and at the same time work with a band like Iron and Wine, you know, and have truly like two ends of a spectrum, and music that I feel is truly transcendent for different reasons.
And also, you know, something else that's quite interesting on the label is a man named David Cross.
Yeah,
it's not just music that Sub Pop releases. Tell us a little bit about this, and I do believe it's not the first album of that kind that Sub Pop, you know, does.
A while ago, Tony Kewell, who's one of our A&R people, said, I want to work with this comedian, David Cross. He does the Mr. Show with this guy, Bob Odenkirk, and a lot of people are fans. Some people didn't know what Mr. Show was. So, but the people who knew were really excited, and Tony literally found David Cross's phone number, called him up and said, hey, would you ever think of doing a record? And David said, I've actually been dying to do a record and I'd love to do one, so let's make it happen. And so the decision was made really quickly. David Cross has made Sub Pop proud for so many reasons, and not just because he is just sharp and quick and just on his feet all the time with his performances, but even more so that he has the balls to really sort of talk about the things that are happening in the world in a very honest way, and to call attention to George Bush or the Catholic Church or, you know, many of the things that are true issues. He doesn't gloss over for fear that it might, you know, negatively affect him. He says, fuck it, these are issues in our world that need to be addressed, and he does it in a way that's even, you know, can even make you laugh. And for that, we feel very proud to work with him.
You guys get a lot of demos?
Oh my God, you have no idea. Yeah, they're more than we could ever make our way through. And we try to sometimes listen to them. If we're taking trips to Portland or something, we'll just put one in after the next, and by 3 hours, you're just like, actually, we bring music that we know everyone agrees on, just so that when you need a break, you can put that in and just go phew and listen to 2 songs before going back to the demos. But the funny thing, I mean, sometimes you don't find anything. Sometimes you find something interesting. Sometimes there's just one song that's amazing, but the rest is like, eesh. You know, and there have been only a couple of bands that Sub Pop has ever worked with from a demo. The last one was Hot Hot Heat. So.
I mean, it's probably you know, a hard thing to pinpoint, but you know, I mean, what is it exactly that you are looking for? What is it?
You know, whatever it is, it would have to be something that just is felt like it's truly relevant, and not just of the moment or not just timeless, but truly relevant. And that can mean so many different things. That can mean David Cross, that can mean Sam Beam, that can mean Wolf Eyes. You know, something that needs to be out there, we believe, for a number of different reasons.
And what would you say, you know, I mean, we're coming up 20 years now, Sub Pop's been around, per se, for. What do you think the biggest lessons that the label's learned over those years?
You know, I think the biggest one that we actually talk about fairly frequently is that it's really hard to be so good at what you do. No, I'm kidding. I think the biggest lesson is that you take the lessons that you learn to heart, because you're always going to fuck up. You're always going to make mistakes. And so long as you're making new mistakes and you're learning new lessons is really the most important thing. I think there are things that we've done as a label that we would never do again, amounts of money spent on a band or something like that. But you also can never say never, and you have to truly be open and flexible and fluid in a way, open to change, ready to change. And when you think you truly understand the music industry and how it works or how to make a band successful, you've dated yourself and it's over. And you always have to be learning, and you always have to understand that you never truly know how everything is going to work and does work, because you don't.
And one thing, you know, I mean, we'll wrap it up pretty soon, but tell us a little bit about your staff, because I don't know, Sub Pop seems like a, you know, I don't want to say the word cheesy, but a great, big, happy family.
You know, I actually love talking about this, and I know that I'm going to come off as a completely fucking weirdo cheerleader that you're going to want to smack in the head, and I just would please ask you not to. But I cannot believe that I work with the people I work with. Honestly, it amazes me that we have the pool of people that we do over there. People are, and I actually think this group would appreciate it, because I think there's a similar atmosphere or environment, in that there's a structure, but it's a loose structure, so that there's room to sort of just, I guess, switch things up if it needs to be switched up. And there aren't, there are like normal boundaries and things, but it's a very loose culture and a way of operating. We don't sit there and look at the watch when every employee comes in the morning. There are 2 people who suffer from chronic tardiness, and it drives people nuts. But for the most part, like, people come in, they do their job, they do it really well, and they're so friggin' good at what they do that it really is mind-blowing. We try to promote people from within, and we try to provide an environment where people can, these guys are feeling embarrassed. But,
I'm just trying to figure out who the other one is.
Making sure I'm not one.
I'll tell you.
Determined one.
I'll tell you later. But the God, now my mind is wandering because there are other people who had the same problem, but they fixed it. But we try to create a situation where people can really put their best foot forward and use their strengths to sort of define what their job is. So it's something that can be really frustrating for somebody when they come in. Maybe they want a job description that they can follow line by line by line, but we don't like doing that because we kind of believe it's better when someone can come in, and although they know what's expected or what their general job is, how they execute that job is up to them, and that sort of allows for people to use their smarts to determine what's best. And when you bring in a band, this week we had the Elected come in talking about their new record, and you listen to people tell them what to expect from the marketing staff or how we're going to approach this record on a marketing level, I swear I sit there and I'm just like, I cannot fucking believe that these people are Sub Pop employees, because they're amazing and they understand and they get it. I think they're just talented, smart, wonderful, and fun people that I feel very honored to work with. So.
And lastly, I mean, what are you guys excited? What's exciting about Sub Pop for the future? What are you guys excited about?
Well, I think the thing that most people are excited about right now is that our boss has decided to splurge in the biggest way he ever has on his employees, and he's taking us all to New Zealand for a week.
How many staff is that?
25 people. I feel bad for New Zealand. But we're really, really excited about it. And we have some employees who have never left the country. This is going to be their first trip out. Alyssa's never. Alyssa, we have one employee, she's just this incredible woman, and she promised herself that by the time she turned 30, she'd make it out of the country. And she's a year out, and she was told she's going to New Zealand, and she's super happy. Everybody is. We're all excited. But not just about us, like about the bands. I think we're I think we're excited about, there are a lot of exciting things happening right now. Phil, who's sitting in the back right now, has been helping out a bit with the new Shins record that's going to come out sometime next year. Sam Beam, who's incredibly prolific, has been working on a new record that he'll finish working on when his tour is over. We have another Wolf Eyes record that we're going to be putting out. There's lots of great things happening, and lots of, the Flight of the Conchords. Yeah. We signed the Brunettes and Flight of the Conchords, 2 New Zealand bands, and we're really excited to get going on those and to sort of bring those people into the Sub Pop family.
Megan, Mark, and Carly, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks so much.